Cristiano Ronaldo is one of the greatest footballers ever, and that shouldn't be controversial. 5 Ballon d'Ors, hundreds of goals, league titles across multiple countries, Champions League trophies, longevity that borders on the absurd level. This man has been playing since 2004. But what if the biggest part of Ronaldo's legacy isn't what happened on the pitch? What if it's the stories that were built around his legacy? Because when you start digging deep into some of these common claims surrounding Ronaldo's career, a pattern begins to emerge. The reality is often more complicated than the narrative. This isn't an argument that Ronaldo isn't an all-time great. Ronaldo is one of the greatest players ever to do it. But this is an argument that many of the myths surrounding his career have grown so large that it's starting to basically fade away what is real. So let's break down some of these narratives that are around Ronaldo's career or legacy. The first narrative is basically saying Ronaldo is all hard work. Yes, Ronaldo has one of the most elite hardworking mentalities in the entire footballing world. No one comes close to him. This guy wakes up at 2 a.m. and is already in the gym, goes to training earlier than anybody else, all that kind of stuff. But the things that Ronaldo is able to do without any drop of talent, with a very little talent, you wouldn't be able to do all that. Ronaldo is one of the most talented footballers on the planet Earth. But most people try to use that to basically be like, Ronaldo is not that talented, but this guy is so talented. You can't do what he's doing with just pure going to the gym and exercising and being disciplined. You cannot just do that. You need to have the talent. And Ronaldo, since he was at Sporting, has had one of the most incredible talents since then. Alex Ferguson basically took Ronaldo from Sporting because he was that talented. He was that good. When he showed up in the Premier League, the first few years or the first 3 years, he was cooking. He was basically destroying any single person that pulled up on him. And Ronaldo was not playing any games. So I don't even know why people keep saying Ronaldo is all hard work and somebody else is this or that. Honestly, he's much closer to Messi in talent than anybody else. The second narrative is probably one of the most popular, and most people wouldn't like me saying this, but the first thing most people say is Portugal was nothing before Ronaldo. You've heard it countless times. The idea that Ronaldo single-handedly dragged Portugal from irrelevance to basically the success they're achieving now is a little bit exaggerated. Let me explain why. It sounds great, but the problem is that it isn't true. Long before Ronaldo was born, Portugal had already produced one of the greatest footballing icons ever, Eusebio. In the 1966 World Cup, Portugal finished third at the World Cup, shocking much of the football world. Fast forward to the last 1990 and earlier 2000s, Portugal wasn't some struggling underdogs waiting for a savior. They were producing elite talent at an incredible rate. They had Luis Figo, Rui Costa, Deco, Fernando Couto. These weren't role players, these were world-class footballers. Portugal reached the semi-finals of Euro 2000. They reached the final of Euro 2004. They finished fourth at the 2006 World Cup. During this tournament, Ronaldo wasn't carrying Portugal. He was the young prospect being introduced into an already elite footballing structure. Even Portugal's greatest achievement in the Euros 2016 doesn't perfectly fit their narrative. Ronaldo was injured and left the final after only 25 minutes. And the best player of the tournament was Bernardo Silva. Portugal won through tactical discipline, defensive organization, and collective effort. Ronaldo deserves his flowers and he deserves his credit for helping Portugal throughout the tournament, but the idea that Portuguese football began with him simply ignores decades of history. Then there's this narrative that Ronaldo conquered Spain. Again, it sounds convincing. After all, he scored an unbelievable number of goals for Real Madrid, but domination isn't measured by goals only. It's measured by trophies. It's measured by so many more. During Ronaldo's 9 seasons in Spain, Real Madrid won 2 La Ligas basically. Meanwhile, Barcelona won 6. For all of Ronaldo's individual brilliance, Spain's domestic landscape was largely controlled by Barcelona. The popular image is of Ronaldo arriving in Spain and taking over the league. The reality is that he spent most of his Spanish career chasing a Barcelona side that constantly outperformed Madrid over the course of long league seasons. And that's not a criticism of Ronaldo, it's simple context that often disappears when discussing his legacy. The same thing happens when people talk about Real Madrid's Champions League dynasty. The story usually goes like this: Real Madrid struggled in Europe, Ronaldo arrived, and everything changed. But that's not actually how events unfolded. Ronaldo joined Madrid in 2009. The Champions League titles didn't immediately flow. Instead, Madrid suffered years of disappointment. Round of 16 exits, semi-final exits, near misses. The breakthrough came later, and it basically came with the arrival of players like Luka Modric and Toni Kroos. These weren't just great midfielders, they became the engine of one of the greatest club teams ever assembled. Football history tends to focus on goal scorers, but controlling the game basically wins the tournament. Toni Kroos and Modric gave Madrid control. Casemiro added balance. Sergio Ramos provided leadership. Karim Benzema sacrificed personal numbers for the collective. The dynasty wasn't built by one player, it was built by an extraordinary collection of players functioning together. The evidence became even harder to ignore when you look at what happened after Ronaldo left. Real Madrid won the Champions League again and again without him, and that does not basically diminish Ronaldo's contribution, but the core of Real Madrid's dominance has always been its midfield: Toni Kroos, Modric, Casemiro, and his defense. Even though Ronaldo scored that many goals, Real Madrid in general was a world-class team. That is why they are still dominating in Europe up to now. They basically started falling off after Toni Kroos and Modric left. Their main backbone basically left, and they are struggling to find their way now. This basically simply challenged the idea that he alone was responsible for Madrid's European dominance. Another common narrative is that Ronaldo can thrive independently of any system. Unlike other stars, we are told he doesn't need teammates to basically create opportunities. But football doesn't work that way, especially for Ronaldo's play style. No striker creates goals from thin air, especially not a player whose greatest strength is finishing. At his peak, Ronaldo played with some of the greatest creators of our generation. He played with Ozil, Di Maria, Marcelo, Karim Benzema, Luka Modric, Toni Kroos. These players constantly generated chances, and Ronaldo converted them at a historic rate. And that isn't a weakness. That's literally the job of an elite goal scorer. But the narrative often presents him as a one-man army. But the reality is that his success, like every other attacker in history, depended on elite support. When he moved to Juventus and later returned to Manchester United, the surrounded infrastructure wasn't nearly as strong, and the results basically reflected that. Then there's the famous claim that Ronaldo always delivers in the biggest moment. This one survives largely because people remember highlights more than the actual game. The problem is that highlights ain't the full story. Take the 2014 Champions League final. When Real Madrid desperately needed a goal, it wasn't Ronaldo who rescued them, it was Sergio Ramos. His dramatic 93rd minute equalizer saved Madrid's season. Ronaldo later scored a penalty in extra time after the game was already effectively decided. In 2016, the final also finished 1-1, again thanks to Sergio Ramos, who scored Madrid's goal. The match went to penalties. Ronaldo converted his kick. Important, absolutely, but not the decisive moment everybody remember it to be. Then in 2018, Carabao produced one of the greatest Champions League final performances ever. The bicycle kick, the long range strike, the game-changing contribution. Not Ronaldo. Again, this isn't an attack. It's simply a reminder that football is often remembered through simplified stories than a completed event. One of the most uncomfortable discussions for Ronaldo supporters involves the World Cup, because for all his achievements, one statistic stands out. Across multiple World Cups, Ronaldo never scored a knockout stage goal. Every World Cup goal he scored came in the group stage. Think about that for a second. This is a player frequently described as the ultimate big game performer, yet football biggest tournaments never saw him scoring the rounds that directly determined champions. Does that erase everything else he achieved? Of course not, but it complicates the narrative. Now let's talk about one of the most persistent myths in football: the idea that Ronaldo remained an elite long-range shooter throughout his career. This is where the narrative may be far or maybe the farthest from reality. Ask most fans to describe Ronaldo. Many of them will basically say his rockets from 35 yards, his strikes, his knuckleballs, his impossible screamers, and to be fair, those goals happened. Ronaldo was scary. Every single time he had a ball, he could shoot from anywhere across the pitch. The problem is that most of them happened during a specific period of his career. Earlier Manchester United and earlier Real Madrid. That version of Ronaldo was explosive, dynamic, fearless. He attacked defenders directly. He shot from a distance with confidence, and sometimes the results were spectacular. The Porto goal, the Arsenal goal, moments that live forever on YouTube. But YouTube creates a distorted reality. You see the goal, you don't see the 50 failed attempts surrounding it. As Ronaldo aged, his game drastically changed. He became less of a winger and became more of a penalty box striker, a predator, a poacher, a specialist. Most of his goals incredibly came from inside the box: one-touch finishes, headers, tappings, near post runs, elite movement, elite positioning, elite finishing. Ironically, he became more efficient as a goal scorer by becoming less dependent on long-range shooting. Yet the old image never disappeared. Fans continued to treat him as if he remained the same distant shooting phenomenon he had been years earlier. The statistics tell a different story. His volume of long-range attempts remained high. His efficiency did not. He continued taking difficult shots from improbable positions. Many attacks ended with low percentage effort. The highlight reel preserved the successes. The misses faded from memory. The same phenomenon phenomenon applies to free kicks. For years, Ronaldo's free kick stance became iconic. The legs apart, the big deep breath, the dramatic build-up. It looked intimidating, it looked legendary, and for a period, it genuinely was effective. But eventually, the results stopped matching the reputation. His conversion rate declined significantly, yet the narrative remained frozen in time. Every free kick still carried the aura of unpredictability, despite the numbers suggesting otherwise. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of modern sports. Reputation often lags behind reality. Fans always remember peak versions of players long after those versions no longer exist. Another chapter often presented as proof of Ronaldo's greatness is Juventus. The story says he went to Italy and also conquered another league, but the context matters. Juventus were already dominant before he arrived. They had won 7 consecutive league titles. They had reached multiple Champions League finals. They were already Italy's superpower. The expectation wasn't merely to maintain success. The expectation was to elevate Juventus into Champions League winners, and that didn't happen. In fact, the Champions League performances basically got worse. Ajax eliminated them, then Lyon, then Porto. Meanwhile, Juventus eventually lost their domestic dominance as well. Again, Ronaldo scored plenty of goals. Nobody is basically saying he didn't, but the question is whether the overall project achieved its objectives, and the answer is basically less clear. There is this idea that Ronaldo automatically makes his teammates better. This may be the most difficult narrative to evaluate because it involves tactics rather than statistics. Ronaldo demands attention, he demands service, and when you have one of the greatest goal scorers ever, that's understandable. But every tactical system has its trade-off. When a team is built around maximizing Ronaldo's scoring output, other players often sacrifice their own freedom. No example illustrates this better than Karim Benzema. For years, Karim Benzema adapted his game to support Ronaldo. He created a space, he linked up plays, he facilitated attacks. His own numbers often suffered as a result. Then Ronaldo left. Then suddenly Benzema became the focal point. Eventually, he won the Ballon d'Or. At Juventus, Dybala faced similar challenges as the tactical priorities shifted. At Manchester United, the team became increasingly focused on supplying Ronaldo rather than maintaining collective attacking balance. This doesn't mean Ronaldo made teams worse. That's too simplistic. It means football resources were finite, touches were finite, opportunities were finite. Building around one superstar changes the ecosystem around everybody else. And that brings us to the central question: what exactly is Ronaldo's legacy? The answer is that I'm not saying he's overrated, far from it. The answer is that he's become something even bigger than a footballer. He's become a story, a brand, a symbol. And like all symbols, the story surrounding him often grew larger than reality. The reality is already extraordinary. A player who transformed himself multiple times, a player who maintained elite standards for 2 decades, a player who scored at a rate few athletes in any sport have ever matched. That reality doesn't need exaggeration. It doesn't need myths. It doesn't need carefully edited highlight compilations, because the truth is impressive enough. Cristiano Ronaldo is one of the greatest footballers ever, but many of the claims surrounding him reveal more about how modern sports narratives are created than what they actually are on the pitch. Perhaps that is the most fascinating thing about his legacy. Not the goals, not the trophies, not even the records, but how a footballer became a myth and how over time the myth became bigger than the player himself. Anyways, that'll be all for this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe for more videos like this. Till next time, au revoir.